Okay, last time I said we will do Japanese and Korean today, but unfortunately I can't yet because I found that I need to explain something first before we can go into the more so-called isolated language. So let's look at some linguistic classifying languages. How can we classify our human language? This is also known as language topology. It is a field of linguistics that studies and classifies languages according to their structural features. Aim is to describe and explain the common properties and the structural diversity of the world's languages. So I think I will do, which one first? Okay, I will do the shorter version first and then come back with this one with a longer explanation. So let's move to the next one. I will do this first.
The smallest unit of meaning in a language is called a morpheme. Let's take a lovely English word, inconceivable. There are three morphemes there. Conceive, which in this context means to form something in your head. Now you could break that down further if we were in old Latin, but in English, that is a morpheme. Con and ceive don't mean anything on their own here. Then we've got able, which means the possibility of something. Conceivable, we can think about this. And then we've got in, which negates it. Inconceivable, we cannot possibly think about this. Different languages have very different approaches on how to deal with morphemes. And those approaches are the reason why some languages have many short words and others have long structures that are frequently difficult for adults learning a new language to deal with. There is a spectrum, and it stretches from analytic to synthetic. Over on the analytical side, there are the isolating languages like Chinese and Vietnamese. Here, each morpheme is usually an entirely separate word. Assembling a sentence in one of these languages means you're mostly picking and choosing words and putting them next to each other. Next along the spectrum, there are the agglutinative languages like Turkish and Inuktitut. Agglutinative, it's a lovely word, has the same Latin roots as the word glue. You are gluing words together from their component parts. So rather than picking extra words to add to your sentence, you are adding prefixes or suffixes to words that are already there. Now, depending on the language, you might add affixes for tense, person, number, belonging, possession, or even things like whether an action was deliberate or not. Next up are the fusional languages. Now, they work in the same way, assembling bits to make a full word with all the meaning you want. But now the bits you're adding affect the parts you've got already, tweaking how it looks or how it sounds. Not only that, but each of the bits you're adding can have multiple different meanings attached to it. Tense, number, person, all sorts of things can be coded with just one sound attached to a word. Take hablo in Spanish. That O morpheme, it means first person, singular, present, indicative. That's a lot of meaning in a very short sentence. And then all the way over here are the polysynthetic languages. Basically, the really, really extra synthetic languages. You'll find this in Algonquin languages, up in the cold parts of North America. This is where you can combine potentially a dozen or more morphemes, enough for a whole sentence, a whole coherent thought into one long word. And it really is a word. The individual parts can't be split apart and survive on their own. The morphemes you're using might be agglutinative in separate blocks, or they might be fusional, affecting everything around them. But at any rate, you have an entire sentence in the form of one beautiful, long, interconnected word. Now, here's the thing. Most English speakers consider polysynthetic languages to be the crazy side of language. It seems incredibly complicated. And for adults trying to learn a polysynthetic language, it is incredibly confusing. But children may actually find these languages easier to learn because the words are long and intertwined, and each bit affects another. So there's more redundancy there. If you mishear or misunderstand one part, you are much more likely to be able to work out what was meant from how all the words around it have changed. It's important to remember that, like many things in life, this is a spectrum. There aren't many languages that fit neatly into any one of these categories. English is actually a fairly isolating language down at this end of the scale, but it's still gradually classified as synthetic because we've got many, many words like inconceivable. And the family that English belongs to, Indo-European, is pretty synthetic too. And while this is the conventional approach to classifying languages, it does have a few problems. It distinguishes loads of different categories on this side of the spectrum, but it lumps all the isolating languages together. That's probably because most of the linguists who set up the classification, particularly the early ones, were European, so they concentrated on the differences that made sense to them. Languages are messy things that shift and change over time between places and people. Categorizing them can be useful for research, and it tells you a few things about the possibilities of what the human brain can do. But once you start to file them away, you start to realize that, like most everything about human communication, they really don't fit into neat little boxes.
Okay, so it describes a full range of different languages. I think Chinese is one of those in that side analytic. One word, one word, one word. English is a bit of fusion. You have in conceive the E change, remove the E becomes ABLE. So there's a little bit change, but it's also, what's that? Gluten, gluten that may stick together. So what is the TEMI?
Yeah, so you can have the first part, say, can do, say alarm, say alar, can't. So the first part is the same, but the second part can be can or cannot.
Okay, so
that is what is fusion. Is that like English, isn't it?
Yes,
because the roots are Indo-European.
Yeah, Indo-European. So it's still like English and probably like German, French, etc. The whole European language. So that's why I find it difficult to introduce Japanese and Korean, because they are not like Chinese. They are not like English. They are very different. So I need to give you some background in this organization before we can talk. So next time we'll talk about Korean and Japanese.
Albert, I'm glad you mentioned German, actually. I was surprised that that video didn't mention German, which to me is, when I think of synthetic languages, German is the one that I think of, where you tie 3, 4, perhaps even 5 words together to make one word.
There is more fusion. The
fusion, yes.
Is really long. Yes.
I think I mentioned this last week. I would say it looks like the Koreans and the Japanese, genetically, the links with Chinese is very tenuous. It's not very
not very strong.
This is what
not very strong. A lot of people think they have a very strong link, but in fact, culturally, they are not. But on the other hand, they did learn a lot from China. So there is a huge Chinese influence on both Korean and Japanese, okay? But they are a different culture from China. So their language is different. Even now, last time we talked about the Chinese, we have different words. And then our sentence order is subject, verb, object. The Japanese is subject, object, verb. So even the order is different, right? So that is where I need to get into this to explain. There are many, many different types of languages, and then classifying them is typically very difficult. It is a field by itself. So let me go back to this longer version, which explains a bit more about the language topology. So is there any problem on the other side, on the Zoom side? No, so we will see this video as well. This one is a bit longer, about 25 minutes long. So we will have a listen and then we'll talk about that.
At present, there are about 7,200 living languages ranging from regional types to the dominant languages of the Indo-European or Sino-Tibetan families. This e-lecture discusses and exemplifies the main linguistic parameters with which languages can be classified. We will proceed as follows. First, we will provide an overview of the parameters with which languages can be classified. And then we will discuss each of these parameters in detail. In principle, One could choose any linguistically relevant parameter to classify languages. For example, the use of color terms, the number of vowels of a language, the numerical system a language uses, or the complexity of syllables, to name a few. However, in looking at a vast number of languages, it has turned out that there are some linguistic parameters along which languages can best be classified. For example, there is the morphological or structural parameter. Another one concerns the classification of languages in terms of its basic word order pattern. Whereas the first parameter, the morphological or structural one, classifies languages on the basis of their word structure, in particular in terms of its inflectional properties. The second uses the sequence of the basic functional elements of clause structure, that is subject, verb, and object. A third parameter can be used to classify languages on the basis of their phonological structure. Let us start with structural aspects. Languages can be morphologically classified on the basis of the inflectional structure of their words, thus in terms of a continuum. Now, this continuum is symbolized by this vertical line here. At one extreme of this continuum, we find so-called analytic or isolating languages whose words have little or no internal structure. At the other extreme, we have synthetic languages, which do allow the analysis of their words into smaller parts or morphs. Let us look at these two extremes in more detail. Analytic languages generally do not allow the segmentation of their words. That is, the words of an analytic language cannot or hardly be split into smaller units. Thus, a typical analytic language is a language where there's a one-to-one correspondence between words and morphemes. Well-known examples of analytic languages are Chinese and Vietnamese. Synthetic languages, by contrast, do allow a segmentation of their words into morphs. Here are two examples. The first is an example from Turkish. Adamların, which means men in the genitive case, consists of 3 morphs. A second example has been taken from German. Menschen, humans, consists of 2 morphs. So both languages allow the segmentation of their words into morphs. In other words, they are synthetic. The degree of synthesis is different. One could argue that German is less synthetic than Turkish because there are fewer inflectional possibilities in German. Let us now look at the function of the morphs in German and Turkish in more detail. Now, in Turkish, we have a clear-cut correspondence between morphs and their grammatical function. Adam, which means man, is the stem. Lar stands for the plural, and in stands for the genitive. In German, the same holds for Mensch, which is the stem. But what about the affix? Well, in Turkish, we can say the 2 bound morphs, plural and genitive, lar and in, are functionally unambiguous. But in German, by contrast, well, we have a problem. The affix can denote the plural in its nominative case, the plural in its genitive case, in the dative and in the accusative case. It can even denote the singular genitive, as in des Menschen Gesicht, the human's face. In other words, whereas in Turkish, the bound morphs are functionally unambiguous, in German, the bound morphs exhibit several grammatical functions. Thus, depending on the function of these morphs, we can define 2 types of synthetic languages. On the one hand, we can define so-called agglutinating languages, and this is the case for Turkish, whose morphs are by and large functionally unambiguous. In such a language, which is sometimes also called agglutinative, a word may consist of more than one morph, but the boundaries between the morphs are always clear-cut. Moreover, a given morph has mostly a reasonably invariant shape so that its identification is also straightforward. Another example of an agglutinating language is Japanese. So you move Japanese over here into a position close to Turkish. On the other hand, we have synthetic fusional languages like German, where the dependent morphs often have several grammatical functions associated with them. In fusional or inflecting or inflective languages, there are no clear-cut boundaries between the morphs. Also, several grammatical properties are often fused together to give a single unsegmentable morph. Most Indo-European languages are fusional. For example, Latin, well, which is fairly synthetic and fusional. Russian, which is also fairly synthetic and fusional, but perhaps less synthetic than Latin, but more synthetic than German. So these Indo-European languages are synthetic and fusional. And what about present-day English? Well, English has traditionally been classified as a synthetic fusional language, but it also has a large number of indivisible, that is, analytic words, that is, conjunctions, prepositions, pronouns, etc. So English perhaps should be placed somewhere over here. It involves a high degree of analysis, but also has synthetic elements, which are, of course, fusional rather than agglutinating. Note that it is often difficult to assign a language to the agglutinating or fusional type. Many languages have properties of both. Let us now look at the second parameter, the syntactic parameter of word order. The order of the functional constituents of clause structure, that is subject, verb, and object, has been made into the second, or maybe even the first, the most important typological parameter along which languages can be classified. This provides us with 6 theoretically possible word order types. For example, languages could exhibit the SVO structure. Then languages could be organized in terms of SOV. Another possibility is to have the verb in the first position, then the subject, and then the object. Or to have the verb in the first position, then the object, and then the subject. And it's also imaginable that languages start their sentences with objects, then the subject, and then the verb, or they have a structure where the object is followed by the verb and then the subject. In fact, all 6 theoretically possible types are used in the languages of the world. However, the distribution of these types across the languages of the world is relatively remarkable, because we find that these orders here, the first 3, cover the vast majority of the languages of the world, and that the other types, these 3, are very much marginal. Well, what do the first 3 have in common? Well, they have in common that the subject always precedes the object. Let us illustrate this with some languages. For example, English is a typical SVO language. Turkish is an example of an SOV language. And Arabic is an example of a VSO language. So these are the 3 main types. And in fact, the vast majority of the languages of the world use any of these 3 types of word order. The main question arises now, how do we establish the basic word order of a language? Well, let us illustrate this with present-day English. In present-day English declarative sentences, and these are the sentence types we are going to explore, the following word order types can be found, or not. We all know that English has many examples where we have the subject indicated in red, then the verb, blue, and the object represented in green. The man saw the woman. No problems with that word order. SOV, by contrast, is impossible in present-day English. So the man the woman saw is absolutely impossible. There's no sentence in present-day English which can exhibit the SOV structure. Now, VSO is an interesting type of word order, which is possible in present-day English. However, as you can see in the example, never has the man seen the woman. There must be an adverbial preceding. The adverbial, of course, is never. And then we have a VSO word order. However, the adverbial has to be of a negative kind. By no means has the man seen the woman is possible, but always has the man seen the woman does not work. So this is possible, but exceptional. Verb, object, subject is certainly impossible. Never has the woman seen the man. Well, superficially, it looks as if the first sentence, never has the woman seen the man, is possible. However, please note that the woman is the object and the man the subject. We can illustrate the impossibility of the sentence by replacing them with pronouns, and then you have never has her seen he, and that's, of course, totally out. OSV, the next word order, the woman the man saw is impossible. However, quite interestingly, it works in cases of object fronting under certain thematic pressure. The woman he saw, or I always remember the famous Metallica line, "Trust I seek," from Nothing Else Matters. The old rock musician comes through. So this works, however, in very rare cases. In fact, the condition is that the subject, he, must be nominative marked. So for example, we have I, he, she, we, and they. And finally, OVS, the woman saw the man. Again, this looks superficially as if it was possible. The woman saw the man. However, please note the woman indicated in green is the object, the man the subject. If we draw a parallel with pronouns, then you can easily see that her saw he is impossible. So what can we conclude from this? Well, we can conclude that in present-day English declarative sentences, the overwhelming majority of sentences exhibits the SVO word order. Thus, present-day English is an SVO language. And this can easily be supported by the analysis of English text corpora. Over and above the basic word order, there are interesting correlations, that is, ordering patterns that concern other head modifier relationships, and there may be problems. However, these will be discussed in a separate e-lecture on word order typology. Let's finally look at the phonological parameters of language classification. Well, there are several possibilities of classifying languages phonologically. For example, one could use segmental aspects such as the presence or absence of certain segments or segmental effects. Examples could be the pre-absence, presence or absence of particular vowels or consonants, or the use of nasalization. However, such segmental parameters are less significant than suprasegmental aspects, such as the classification of tonal phenomena or the rhythmic organization of a language. So let's look at them in more detail. Now, pitch variations that affect the meaning of a word are called tones. A language that uses this technique is referred to as a tone language. Well, let's illustrate this on the map. The simplest kind of tone language uses two possible tones, that is high tones and low tones. Such languages are called registered tone languages, and they can be found primarily in Africa, for example, within the Bantu languages. More complex tone systems use contour tones, tones that involve gliding movements, for example, rising tones, falling tones, fall-rise, or rise-fall. The most well-known contour tone languages can be found in Asia, for example, in the Sino-Tibetan languages or in the Austroasiatic languages. Let us listen to some Chinese tones to illustrate this effect. Now, here are the numbers 1 to 10 in Chinese, taken from a dialect spoken in Wuhan. Let's listen to the tones.
1,
Clearly a level tone,
2,
rising,
3,
level,
4,
rising,
5,
falling,
6,
level,
7,
level,
8,
level,
9,
falling,
10,
and level again. So this should suffice to illustrate the tones in Chinese. The second phonological parameter which is often applied is a rhythmic parameter. Now, according to the rhythmic organization of speech, languages can be subdivided into two types: stress-timed and syllable-timed. A language is defined as stress-timed when it shows, at a given rate of speech, a rhythmic patterning where tone units are roughly perceived as equal in length. English is such a case. Now, here you have a sentence represented phonologically with syllable boundaries. Many intelligent students go to Marburg, and the line I've just inserted indicates that we have two tone units with one nucleus each: stew and ma. Many intelligent students go to Marburg. Both tone units with one nucleus are roughly perceived as equal in length. Thus, English is a typical stress-timed language. This can be contrasted with Italian. Now, the direct translation of this sentence into Italian is molti studenti intelligenti vanno a Marburg. And if you listen carefully, you will find that here we have a tendency for every syllable to be heard as lasting approximately the same amount of time. So Italian is syllable-timed. Let us summarize. We have defined several parameters for the classification of languages. Morphologically, languages can be classified in terms of a continuum between analytic and synthetic. Syntactically, the basic word order, that is the order of the main functional elements in declarative sentences, constitutes the central parameter. In phonology, segmental as well as suprasegmental features, and here in particular, tonal and rhythmical aspects, constitute the basis for a typological classification of the languages of the world. In addition to these central parameters, numerous specific parameters ranging from phonology to syntax and even beyond come in. But that's a different story.
Very complicated, right?
Interesting as well.
Yeah, interesting as well. How come humans would develop such a variety of different languages? Basically, I would try to say is that we are experimenting with different possibilities. Some groups will experiment with an individual unit of meaning, and then assemble them together without changing the basic one. That is Chinese. But some will say, okay, I have a whole meaning, but this meaning is pulled out from different parts and join them together, inconceivable. So I think human has been trying different languages. I mean, I don't know whether we should go into Korean and Japanese next time now. We basically have a pretty good understanding of the different types of languages we have around the world.
Is it possible that as people around different parts of the world, like the geography, like in evolution, there are changes that happen. That's why we look different.
Yeah.
Is it possible that this could have even affected the voice box or and so on, that made it easier to use, go a certain way?
Okay. The question is, we go to different areas, and then as we adapt to the environment, for example, our skin color change, will that also change our voice box, and therefore changes our language structure? I don't know, but there is one very interesting type of language, which involves a lot of Africa, and to us, it's only one sound, but they can distinguish 9 different. That is incredible. And how can we say something and then to us it's impossible. To them it's very. So I think now, because we originate from Africa, so everybody can do that sound, right? But it's just that this sound is not incorporated into our language. Whereas in Africa, it is some of the languages incorporate this sound as well. So that is another interesting thing. Why this language doesn't come out into the rest of the world? It's mainly remain in Africa. That's a very interesting. So maybe after looking at, next time I still will look at use Korean and Japanese. Maybe since Vietnam is being mentioned, I see whether I can pull something from Vietnam to look at the other language types that we are not familiar with.
But the Vietnamese is Romanized now.
But the sound is the same. Whether it's Romanized, it's still, now a lot of languages, for example, Japanese and Korean, because they learn a lot from China, so they have taken a lot of knowledge from China, and to describe that knowledge, it is difficult to invent a new word. It's better to use the direct Chinese word to represent the thing that they have taken into their culture. And therefore, the Japanese and Korean will see a mixture of the phonetic, which is their original, and the Hanji, which is the Chinese. They take the Chinese word into the language and incorporate that. And sometimes with minor stroke order changes. But that is very significant in Korean and Japanese, but it's not significant in Vietnam.
Albert, sorry,
hang on. Yeah, the question is why Vietnamese is Romanized?
No, you are saying it's Romanized
yeah.
now.
Yeah,
what
now.
What was it before?
The alphabet, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they haven't developed a language, a writing system. Until
my understanding is that it was imposed during the French occupation. The Vietnamese had no say in it. The colonial power said, you will write it this way. That's my understanding, and I could be corrected.
No, I think what we can do is do a research on it, and then we'll. Yeah, maybe the occupation killed the language.
But if you look at Myanmar, if you look at Thailand, if you look at Cambodia, their script looks very much like Indian script. Yeah, on Sanskrit.
You can't read their word.
Yeah.
Can you read?
No, I can't read that. I don't know Sanskrit.
Written in Sanskrit.
Yeah, because mine is Tamil. It's a Dravidian language, but it's older. But yeah, they all look similar to Indian languages.
Yeah, to me,
the words look very similar.
Yeah, the Thailand, the Cambodia, Myanmar, that region, the region in the what we call the South, Indo area, the Indian round, and they up to Vietnam is on the Pacific side.
Why is interesting about Vietnam? How is it that Vietnam doesn't have?
But Vietnam's culture is influenced by the Chinese.
But then why won't they have Chinese script there?
No, they haven't got Chinese script inside Vietnam.
No, why?
I don't know. Now, there are.
The culture is really influenced by Chinese because of the government. They look into China as.
Yeah. Now, Vietnam. Now, there are a few societies which is very difficult to conquer. So even when there's external force coming in, the rebellion is very strong. You cannot change them. One of the areas is Afghanistan. 20 years.
I was going to ask a completely different question, and I'm going back to what you were saying about the sound. There are other sounds which are interesting. As far as I understand it, English is the only European language which hasn't got the h sound. Even Gaelic, which is used in parts of Britain, has that h sound, and particularly German, Arabic, Hebrew, etc., do have that h sound. The question is, does Chinese and do other Asian languages have the h sound?
Do you have it? You have it. For Chinese,
more like the sound, more like expression of disgust.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, we have. And the Tamil also has.
Right.
It has. What's your native language? Italian, no? Italian and Spanish, nothing like that?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have, again, very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
What about Indonesia? Do they have a script?
No, Indonesia has some Indonesian.
No, Java.
Yeah, but they use Roman script, did it?
They got the Javanese writing.
Yeah.
What is the script like? Is it like Chinese or?
No. They are not like Chinese.
Is it Sanskrit as well?
I'm not sure.
Not sure. Okay, we'll look it up.
Yeah. Just does anybody know why some races or some nations don't have written language?
Okay, the question is why.
Like the Incas.
Yeah, why some cultures do not develop a written language? That's another very interesting. And another interesting is some culture do not develop numbers.
Yeah.
Our Aborigines doesn't have numbers. Yeah, I think so.
Oh.
And
they have a zero until the Indian invent the zero.
Yeah, but the
You're sure Aboriginals don't have numbers?
I think there is at least one culture without number. Maybe I remember it's our indigenous people, but I have to check. I don't think there are cultures without numbers. They count from 1, 2, and then it's everything's many. So now
that's interesting. This is digressing very slightly, but they say that certain birds can count up to 3, and if you're going into a hide to shoot birds, if 4 people go in, the bird will not recognize that 4th person. And so if one person comes out, they think there's only 1 person left in the hide. So, yeah. But Can I go? Can I finish what I was going to say before about the h sound? It's interesting that obviously both English and German use a Latinized alphabet. In German, CH is h, but in English, CH is ch, quite a different sound with the same spelling. And that does make for confusions when some English people try to translate from the German.
Well, that's another very interesting is the number of alphabets is also different. Not 26. Some languages are more than, some languages fewer than alphabets.
Yeah.
So the number of alphabets also, so now there's a, after next time, I think I want to look at is the so-called the tree of the languages. So can we, using the current languages, trace back and then group them together? For example, we call it Indo-European. So that's one family. How can we go back these three? How many levels we can do? I think that would be another interesting topic.
While we're talking about the written language, can I go back a couple of weeks when I was talking about Hebrew, and there was one thing I didn't mention, but comes in when you're talking about language. There is one area where Hebrew speakers will use a transliteration into Latin letters rather than Hebrew. And I'm wondering whether anybody wants to guess or if anybody knows.
Explain
what
what you mean by what?
Transliteration. It means writing the Hebrew word with Latin letters.
You are challenging us because I don't think we have Hebrew speaker here.
No, well, yeah, but okay. The clue is the transliteration will go from left to right, whereas the original Hebrew will go from right to left. And this is an area where you have to go from left to right.
Your numbers.
No, you can write the numbers backwards, sorry, from right to left. But no. I've got you thinking.
Hebrew have this feature.
Yeah. It is when you are writing vocal music. Music is devised to go from left to right, and you can't change it and go from right to left. So if you want to write vocal music, you have to use a transliteration of the Hebrew.
Do you know how the Chinese music is written in Chinese?
No, I don't.
It's written vertically.
Right.
Well, vertically, go to next line, vertically.
But is it vertically right to left or vertically left to right?
Vertically right to left. Yeah, vertically right to left.
Right.
The Chinese music is vertically right to left.
So,
yes, by the way.
So the Chinese developed a system of writing music independent of European custom. Yeah. Right, yeah. Good.
Yes, by the way, the navigation logbook of Chinese logbook, we have the in our middle Ming dynasty, there's the Jiang Ke, who have lead a big fleet and eventually visited the east coast of Africa. Okay, whether they go to America, we don't know, but we know that they at least go to Africa because they bring back a giraffe. A giraffe, so we know that they have been there. Okay, their logbook, how they write their navigation. again is vertically from top to bottom and then from right to left. The logbook is written in this way. So they will say, go east 10 miles, south, no, not south, turn left, how many degrees, and then how far. So the whole logbook, you have to follow from there.
Am I right?
But aren't there other examples of Chinese which goes down the page? I think I've said this before, but as far as I'm concerned, the important thing is whether you start writing in the top left-hand corner or in the top right-hand corner.
Top right-hand corner.
And that tells you whether the language is pre-papyrus or post-papyrus.
I think papyrus and paper are independent development. The Chinese used to write on bamboo sticks.
Yeah.
So
but that again,
total different.
But again, they're carving onto the stick. So it's whether you carve or
no,
whether
it's not carving. We have been using brush for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
But didn't the Chinese invent
Yes, Chinese invent paper, but
before the paper? But what I want to say was just a historical question. When that guy went and with the ships and Africa, whatever came back, did not the emperor burn the ships and say you will not travel again?
Yes, they burned the ships. Yeah, yes, they did burn the ship, burn the logs, but some of the logbooks are being kept by the sailors and then left behind. So the official logbooks are gone. But there are still the individual sailors because these are large fleets. So in each ship do have their logbooks. Some of the smaller ships, logbooks are being kept by the captain, the equivalent captain. So yes, we have a little bit of that information, but not a lot. And that is a strategy. I think the Chinese shouldn't burn that collection of logbooks. But anyway, history. Okay, so the emperor decided you had to burn it. You have to burn it. What do I want to say? Yes, the logbook, the music. Yes, I want to also talk about the earliest musical instrument. Guess what? Guess what is the earliest musical instrument?
The drum.
No.
Must be the flute.
Flutes, yeah.
From where?
A bone flute. Make of bones.
Yeah. Or reeds. Is it reed or bone?
No. I think the one which is left today is the bone. So bone flute. Okay. But whether there are some other, for example, bamboo flutes, etc., we don't know. Because they don't last. We haven't found the agriculture product of that one yet. But we found a bone flutes. So next time, I feel like later.
Albert, I'm going to disagree with you. I'm sorry, but I'm sure that before they picked up and made a flute, people were the nearest thing.
Unfortunately, we haven't left any clue of that one.
Oh no, but yeah, I mean, it's so natural to just start banging with your hands on whatever's in front of you.
Yeah, and
that's a drum.
Well, especially when you are sitting down, human has been making campfires because we eat cooked food. So you can imagine after eating campfire, around the campfire, everybody talking, playing. I think singing, etc., will come in.
Oh yes, yes.
I live in Africa for a while.
Yeah.
When I say all the African, every other culture, somebody will bring out some instrument, their musical instrument. But not African people. They just sing. They have beautiful voices. They just sing. I don't see them bringing out any instrument.
So that will be a very interesting observation. So that means they don't have an indigenous instrument. Is that?
I could be wrong, but I'm just thinking. I don't know whether they have an indigenous instrument.
That is a good question. Yes, sir.
Could you repeat the question?
Now, your friend here, I can't remember. Ramesh, said he had been living in Africa for some time, and the African people just sing without musical instruments. So we were thinking whether do they do not have any indigenous musical instrument?
I think actually they are rhythmatic.
They are very rhythmatic, yes.
Not only that, my wife asked this lady a question. She said, Europeans dance to the sky. And he said, Africans dance to the earth. Africans, when they're dancing, they're always movements to the earth.
Okay, so they are celebrating the earth more than celebrating the sky.
My father was a singing teacher, and therefore I am going to argue that the human voice is a musical instrument.
Yes, yes, we can sing, but not as well as, what's the bird? A live bird. The live bird is very good.
I mean, look, even the way we talk is musical. Yeah. I mean, if I talk in a monotone, it is ridiculous. Well, you have to have intonation, and also, which is music.
We have poems. Poems are musical.
Yes, yes.
We have poems. Poems are musical. And therefore, human has always been playing with this musical sound. That means that's another very interesting observation is our the scale. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do. And that is universal. All culture get that. Maybe a little bit of variations, like, for example, we know that do, re, mi are what we call whole tones. Mi, fa is a half tone.
There's the major, do, re, mi is major tone, and then you can go to a minor tone.
No, I mean,
last year you were in China today, you were talking about a pentatonic scale,
yep,
which is also used in some European cultures.
But I think the Indian music is 24 tones. Is that right?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. So we have the 12 tones. That means we have so-called half tones. Do, re is a whole tone. Re, mi is a whole tone. Mi, fa is a half tone. Fa, la is a whole tone. La, sol is a whole tone. La, ti is a half. No, la, ti is also a whole tone. Ti, la is a. Ti, do is a half tone. Okay, but we can still insert the half tone there to shift scale. So scale. Okay. Do, re,
the piano keyboard, the white notes are
the major
full tone, and the black notes are your half tones.
Yeah. So we have this thing in the European and almost the world, but Indian has in between the black and the white has another grade there.
Very good.
They are 24 tones, so they have and then we can. I think I can also explain why do, mi, la is a major tone using physics.
Can I ask you? Whenever I heard the Chinese sing, they sing at a very high pitch. Even the Indians do that, Bollywood to some extent. But they sing at a very high pitch. Is that fashion or is it not normal? Is it common or what?
Usually, Chinese like to hear high tones, but not everybody can sing to that very high tone. So
the people like the high tone.
People like the high tone. So there are people singing the low tones, and some, I think, we will be interesting to do a folk song sessions, and then different culture bring in their typical folk songs to share.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I'm worried already. No, I don't volunteer. I'm not musical.
Okay, I will try. Okay, I will try to grab some different music from different different countries, and then have a little show to let people have a listen to different folk songs from different. I think in that sense, I will rather, I don't know, I will try. At least in China, we have different kinds of folk songs in different regions. For example, the Beijing opera and the Canton opera is quite different. And then we also have some of the opera in the mainland, the Sichuan opera, etc. So, and then we also have some, I will try to organize one session for folk songs. And then for the Chinese folk song from different regions, I will do it in China Today. Okay, but for the general comparison between different countries, I will do it in Big History. Okay.
That sounds interesting.
That sounds interesting.
And I'll bring some examples.
Good. And yeah. that means our Big History may last more than 1 year. Looking at the speed we are progressing. for languages, we already have how many meetings on this as well. So probably we want to spend more time on languages. And then after that, we still have music. After that, we still have art.
You know,
okay.
You can speak because of a mutation. Something happened in the voice box 100,000 years ago.
Yeah, how many thousand years ago?
100,000.
100,000 is quite a long time. Yes, I even the avatars should be able to speak. The avatars.
They say the egg can't speak is because of the voice box.
Yeah.
Because it's because of a mutation.
Yeah.
That's why.
Because our jaw muscle is much weaker, and therefore allow final control of the voice box there.
Another thing about the language, maybe you can explore that. Why is it that some languages are very beautiful to the ear, like French, very nice to hear. Other languages are very harsh, very harsh. I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Don't you agree?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even different Chinese dialects have the same characteristics.
Yeah, some dialects are very soft and some are very Japanese.
Yeah.
Some are very harsh.
Yeah. So are the Chinese dialects. Is that Suzhou?
I don't know.
Suzhou good. The Suzhou's sound is very nice.
Because they have pretty girls.
No, the most pretty girl is actually in Xinjiang. Xinjiang girl is very beautiful. Okay. This finish here, and then we'll go to the China Today.